So welcome everybody to TESOL International Association's Social Responsibility Intersection. We are pleased to present this webinar titled The Intersectionality of Gender, Sexuality, Race, and Native Speakerness, Investigating ELT Teacher Identity through Duoethnography. Our speakers today are Luke Lawrence and Yuzuko Nagashima. So Luke is a lecturer of English in the Faculty of Sociology in Toyo University, Japan. His research interests revolve around the intersections of various aspects of identity with a focus on issues related to native speakerism. He is published in the Journal of Language, Identity, and Education, ELT Journal, and Applied Linguistics Review, amongst others. He's also the co-editor of Duoethnography in English Language Teaching, Research Reflection and Classroom Application, published by Multilingual Matters. Yuzuko works at Yokohama City University in Japan. Her research interests include language teacher identities in relation to gender and sexuality, translingualism, and critical and feminist pedagogy in ELT. So we are very pleased to welcome all of you to this webinar. My name is Elizabeth Chan, and together with Mitchell Sanderson, we will be your moderators for today's event. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Luke and Yuzuko. So please take it away.
Okay, one moment. Just let me get the PowerPoint ready. One moment, please.
Yeah, so hello everyone, while Luke gets the PowerPoint ready, just a reminder to please keep your microphones muted during the presentation. And also, if you have any questions or comments, just enter them in the chat box during the presentation, and the presenters will address those questions at the end or at the moment. All right, so also all participants in today's event will have access to the recorded version, which will be available within 1 week after the live event. And of course, this session will be recorded and it will last approximately 60 minutes, right? And thank you.
Okay, shall we start? Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Luke.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Yuzuko.
And yeah, as Elizabeth just said, we're going to talk to you about a paper that we published in the Journal of Language, Identity, and Education. And the title is The Intersectionality of Gender, Sexuality, Race, and Native Speakerness. And it's investigating ELT teacher identity through duoethnography. So if you do stick with us for the full time, we're going to spend the first kind of 20 minutes or so going through the paper. And then we're going to have a longer time, about 40 minutes on a workshop, giving you some ideas of how to go about doing a duoethnography, if that's something you're interested in. And yeah, there's plenty of time at the end for questions on either the paper part or on the workshop part. We're happy to answer everything. Anything else we need to say about that, Yuzuko, before we go on? Is that?
Would you like to share some of your identity markers?
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so the whole focus of the thing is on identity. So it's good to kind of get that out of the way at the beginning. Gender-wise, I identify as male. As you can probably hear from my accent, I'm from the UK, which puts me as a so-called native speaker. I'm a white guy and I'm straight. Yuzuko.
My name is I was born and raised in Japan, but I lived in the States for about 10 years to go to school and work there a little bit. So I see myself as some type of bilingual, and also I'm bisexual.
Okay, so let's talk about our paper. Oh, one moment. Oh.
So this project we started as kind of like a form of reflective practice for professional development. I think the beginning was that Luke was working for another project and I helped him for that, and we kind of realized that we have some mutual interests. So we wanted to explore some of that aspect a little bit, and right around that time, we learned about this new methodology called duoethnography. So we decided to just try and see how it goes. In terms of the data collection, we had 6 ongoing discussion sessions in a span of about 3 or 4 months, I believe. And after we finished the whole sessions, probably 6 months after that, we had the one last follow-up recording session to kind of reflect on the whole project. The whole data consists of about 11 hours of audio recording data. We also took some reflective journal writing as we collected data.
Yeah, so there was kind of like the formal kind of parts of the data collection, but on top of that, there was kind of kind of constant email correspondence about different things that we'd each found in the data. Also, at that time, we were working in the same institution, so our offices were like 2 doors away from each other. So if something kind of suddenly struck us, or we had something that we'd kind of just remembered that we'd forgotten to say in one of the discussion sessions, we just kind of walked along and just knocked on the door and had a quick informal chat about it. And all of that went into becoming all part of the data. And we also decided to kind of do some lesson observations for each other's classes. We watched each other teach and made notes about it. It didn't really make it into part of the formal data set, but personally, I found it very, very helpful in order to get this kind of more holistic kind of idea of the identity of the person that I'd been involved in this research project with for this kind of 6 or 7 months. So that was part of it. And yeah, as Yuzuko mentioned, we came across the idea of duoethnography from Lowe and Kikoviak's paper, which came out in 2016. Robert Lowe is a friend of mine. We worked together on the duoethnography book that was just mentioned by Elizabeth from Multilingual Matters. And we kind of realized that the thing that we'd kind of just started, we might be able to turn into some kind of a formal paper when we saw other people doing it like that. So that's basically the genesis of the project. So let's get into some of the kind of details about identity and teacher identity.
So let's take a look at how we approached to the notion of identity in our paper. In the field of research on language education and identity, many researchers have employed a variety of conceptual frameworks so far, and many of their theories have drawn on post-structuralism, or they take some kind of post-structuralist approach. And it's been shown to be pretty productive when it comes to exploring the complex relationships between the agency of individual subjects and the structure of their social relations.
Yeah, and part of that is looking at identity as something that is fluid and non-essentialized and produced socially in terms of interactions with people and institutions and different contexts. Identity is not seen as something that is fixed and unchanging.
Right, and this way of framing is particularly useful when you research identity and language teaching, because identities are understood to be discursively constructed and constantly changing as well through the use of language in a specific time and space as well.
Yeah, and the kind of the last part we wanted to kind of highlight is the idea of this post-structuralist approach that sees identity as a site of struggle over power, which kind of, it sounds kind of dramatic and negative, but it doesn't need to be. But it's just the idea that our identities are always kind of in negotiation with different aspects of hierarchy, whether that's kind of institutionalized hierarchy or societal hierarchy. They're kind of in a constant tension between different modes of hierarchy and which kind of identities are allowed to be accepted and which ones are more marginalized and foregrounded and backgrounded. And that's part of the post-structuralist approach to identity, which we very much took on board when we were writing this paper. And it's also part of the language teacher identity, which we're going to focus on a little bit more now.
So let's take a look at a more specific type, form of identity, language teacher identity here. Borkhuysen provided a pretty wide-ranging characteristics of language teacher identity in his book in 2017, and we picked some of the characteristics that are the most salient to the findings in our study. So let's take a look.
Yeah, so the first quote that we liked is language teacher identities are cognitive, social, emotional, ideological, and historical. They're both inside the teacher and outside in the social, material, and technological world. That's kind of salient for us because as we'll see later on in the presentation, so the idea that your teacher identity kind of begins and ends inside the classroom is a fallacy. And you need to take into account kind of inside the classroom as well as outside, the personal and the professional. Also the idea of kind of competing ideologies, where your personal ideologies come up against kind of practice, which again, we'll talk about later on in the presentation that came up as part of the data.
Right, and second point is they are core and peripheral, personal and professional. They are dynamic, multiple, and hybrid, and they are foregrounded and backgrounded. That's a lot to unpack, but probably the personal and professional, this may be a pretty unique point in terms of language teacher identity compared to language learner identities. Because when we think of teacher identity, we tend to think of only our professional side, like Luke just said, like our teaching beliefs and practicing things like that. But in reality, our personal aspects have a significant influence on a professional side as well. And the last part, foregrounded or backgrounded, is also very relevant. This is related to the notion that we just mentioned in the previous slide, that identities are seen as fluid, multiple, and context dependent. And so depending on the context, some aspects of our teacher identities are foregrounded, or sometimes it's backgrounded, and sometimes it's our choice to do so, like some kind of a form of performance, but other times it's not really in our hand to decide.
Yeah. And just the last little extract that we got from Borkhuysen's excellent kind of composite definition of language teacher identity is the idea that LTIs change short-term and over time, discursively in social interaction with teacher educators, learners, teachers, administrators, and the wider community. And yeah, again, it's just going back to the general kind of post-structuralist idea of discursively produced identities, and this kind of constant tension between structure and agency. So the way we want to present our teacher identities to our students may not necessarily be the way that the students accept or perceive our teacher identities. And the same goes with administrators and institutions. So perhaps we are attempting to becomes that one kind of teacher identity, but various constructs or institutional ideologies maybe can stop us from doing that, or put us into the way that they prefer their teachers to be identified. Yeah, and again, all of that basically all comes out in the paper. So we'll go into the paper in a bit more detail now. Sorry, before that, we need to talk about intersectionality. Sorry.
So in order to analyze these various and complex aspects of our identities as language teachers, we employed an analytical framework called intersectionality. So let's take a look at how the term can be defined here. The term intersectionality was originally coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a civil rights lawyer and legal scholar. And this was out of a necessity that she noticed of including the voice of women of color, especially Black women, into feminist theory and anti-racist policy discourses, because she realized that Black women's intersectional experiences are more than just a sum of racism and sexism. But in the history, their voices and experiences were not well represented in both of these fields. Since then, this concept was adopted and applied to various academic fields, including social sciences and education. And some of the pioneers to do so are Patricia Hill Collins and Surma Bilch. And they gave this definition that well grasp the complexity of intersectionality as an analytical framework. So we'll give you a few moments. So please take a look at the definition on the screen on your own for a few moments.
Okay, so yeah, hopefully that's kind of what we wanted to say. It said it much better than we could have put it ourselves, so we put the whole quote on there. The thing that we do want to draw attention to, though, is the fact that it can be used to analyze power structures of interlocking oppression. I think that intersectionality has become so kind of ubiquitous these days, even in kind of popular culture, that it's kind of often seen as just like intersections, and the kind of the power analysis part of it seems to get left behind. We just want to highlight that, and we also want to highlight the context dependence part of it. Again, as you'll see in a moment when we talk a little bit about our data, context is hugely important in when it comes to different aspects of identity. And just before leaving this slide, as the straight white guy using intersectionality in their research, I just want to say, I don't know what I want to say, but I just want to say that I am acutely aware of my own kind of identity and position as a scholar that is using intersectionality. I'm very aware of the critiques which see kind of white scholars adopting intersectionality as some kind of whitewashing of intersectionality, and I understand that very, very well. And I'm also aware of the kind of arguments kind of taking intersectionality away from its roots in Black feminism is itself this kind of patriarchal thing, and I completely understand it. I'm very sensitive to it, and I'm slightly worried about giving presentations about it. The only thing I would say is that I think for such to keep it within Black feminism would be to make it exclusively US based. And I think the world's a big place, and there are a lot of interlocking oppressions that could be analyzed and used. And I think for such a powerful tool to be kind of restricted to one point in history in one geographical place, I think is I don't know, it seems such a powerful tool that it's a shame not to allow kind of wider use of it. But I'm extremely aware and sensitive to the criticisms of this. Okay, is that okay, Yuzuka? I just wanted to say that.
Sure.
Thank you. Moving on.
So here are the research questions that we came up with that we wanted to explore more to analyze our data by looking at the teacher identity using intersectionality as an analytical tool. So the first research question is, how do our personal identities interact and intersect with our professional identities as language teachers? And what type of effects has this had on our careers?
Yeah, and the second one is, how does the socio-cultural context of language teaching affect our language teacher identity and teaching practice in terms of the intersection of our gender, sexuality, race, and linguistic status? Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go into detail of all of it. So what we're going to do is just show you some extracts from the we're going to go over the themes that emerged in a moment, and then we're going to give some a little bit of data extract to give you a feel of the data, but we're only going to be able to focus on a couple of things, I'm afraid, just because of time. Okay, so these are the themes. The first theme that came out was career trajectories for ELT, so as in our own career trajectory. Oh, sorry, before going on, the methodology of duoethnography, we've taken out of this presentation. All of it is gone into the workshop. So if you're wondering about how we got the data, that's all gone into the workshop. So if you stay, you'll be able to find out that. Sorry, just meant to say that. Okay, the first theme that emerged out of the data after 11 hours of discussion was, first one, career trajectories for ELT.
And the second theme was the teaching beliefs and practice. This is probably the most prominent example of how the personal and the professional are kind of mutually influencing each other. And for this theme, the findings suggest a combination of the notions of gender, sexual orientation, language status, and also nationality.
Yeah, and the third one was the perception of English language teachers by students and by the institutions. And the intersections, the identity parts that came out there were language status, i.e. kind of native speaker or non-native speaker, race, interestingly, and also nationality as well, which seemed to be kind of strongly tied to both of those. Okay, so we're going to give you an example extract of the data now, just to give you a feel of the kind of things that we were talking about.
So the situation when this data came up was I came out as bisexual and have been interested in incorporating LGBTQ issues to him, but I wasn't really sure how I should do it.
Yeah, although she's kind of sugarcoating it a little bit there. So I think part of this data collection, I think we were talking about something, and it was, and I was talking about it in a very kind of heteronormative way. And I think closer to the truth of what happened is that Yusuke was probably slightly frustrated by this heteronormativity, and decided to come out in order to kind of expand the conversation into intersectionality, which we hadn't taken account of at all before. So if you just take a moment just to read this extract of the conversation that is part of the data. And this continued. Okay, hopefully that was enough time to read that. So lots of interesting stuff there.
So let's take a look at some of the findings that the data suggested. And as a response to the first research question, what we found was that both of us have been fetishized and also sexualized as a result of the existing stereotypes of based on our gender, race, sexuality, but in a very different context. For my case, me being a Japanese woman, being an international student in the States, and I had struggled with the way certain men look at me or treated me through this like specific type of gaze, like so-called yellow fever. And to them, I felt like I was just boiled down simply as the object of their fetish. And that really made me feel uncomfortable. And I already knew that I would like to kind of stay away from these encounters as much as possible. So I didn't really even think about it, but being a Japanese teacher was not off the table to me from the beginning.
Yeah, and in my case, in the context of teaching in Japan, so there's kind of a it's kind of a well documented kind of phenomena. It's known as akogare, which is like desire for the other, which is mainly kind of Japanese women desire for kind of white Western men. And I felt kind of fetishized and kind of otherized in that context, which kind of limited my career options to some extent. I didn't really want to get involved with anything like, or even put myself in that kind of uncomfortable position in any way whatsoever. So on the surface, there's some similar experiences going on here. But what we need to think about is, again, using intersectionality and thinking about the power hierarchies. These experiences of ours were similar, sure, but definitely not equivalent. So we need to think about global power structures, which, you know, put the white males having vastly superior power in nearly all contexts. So although I perhaps felt slightly uncomfortable, the fact was that I was an authority, I was a teacher, I was in a position of white male authority, and my students were mainly younger Japanese females. This is very, very different from years ago on the streets of America, being kind of, you know, hypersexualized, etc. In that position of not having power at all. So although I very naively used the word parallel in our discussion, when we came to analyze it using this intersectionality framework, I realized there was no parallel really, and they should not be seen as equivalent in any way whatsoever.
In terms of the second research question, our finding is in relation to differing approaches to LGBTQ pedagogy for each of us. And for my case, as the excerpt that we just showed you suggests, me being bisexual was pretty much the origin of my interest to kind of incorporate LGBTQ plus pedagogy in my classes. But exactly because of my sexual orientation, I wasn't really sure how I should approach it, because it is such a personal and also very private aspect for myself. And in retrospect, I think I was afraid of potential repercussion or like possible backlash from my students.
Yeah, and then conversely, LGBTQ plus pedagogy was something that I'd been interested in already, but I was coming at it from the approach of what you do, social responsibility, social justice. I was coming at it from that approach, and I didn't even think twice that it wasn't something that I should be doing. Again, this is kind of straight privilege, but also what also came up in the discussion was also, it wasn't only to do with sexuality, but also nationality and language status as well. So this seems to be the idea in Japan, but possibly other kind of Asian countries as well, that kind of LGBTQ plus issues are kind of something for other countries. They're kind of a Western kind of thing, and there's something that are not talked about in the Japanese context. So me being not being Japanese and being a native speaker seemed to me to give me more, students were more kind of forgiving and accepting of a foreigner talking about these kind of concepts. But also the fact that I was straight and I didn't have any worries about kind of personal repercussions also gave me this kind of double privilege. So that was one of the interesting things that came out of the second research question. Sorry.
So now let's take a look at some of the challenges that we encountered in this project. The first one was during the process of the data collection. Especially at the beginning of the data collection stage, our conversations, our dialogues could be sometimes rather interviewee, like formal, a little bit dry interactions. And probably this is partially because of the fact that we didn't really know each other too well at that time. I mean, like, as we said, we were working for the same language program, but that was pretty much it. So I remember I was excited about this, but definitely nervous too, especially because this was my first academic research I took on since grad school. But then after we went over the data and discussed this issue, we kept in mind this point in the following session to kind of create more comfortable and relaxing space where we can spontaneously interact with each other. And eventually this became no longer an issue.
Yeah.
The second point is the power imbalance to negotiate. When we collected the data, as we said, we hold the same positions as English teachers in the same language program. And in fact, I had worked there 1 year longer than Luke. And this would give me a seniority in the, the conventional context of the university faculty. But it is also true that Luke was by far the more experienced teacher and has more
Slightly more experience.
Has more research experience and also 9 years older than me. And I knew that this power imbalance of Luke as being older, white male, more experienced teacher, doing this research in his first language against me as a younger female, less experienced teacher using my second language. And I know it sounds kind of funny, like when you juxtapose like this much difference between us, but I knew that it might become a concern, at least to me at one point, one way or another. So we did briefly discuss this issue beforehand, but even during the data collection, I sometimes felt the need to mitigate this issue somehow. So that is why, as we mentioned earlier, I decided to do reflective journal writing after each recorded conversation so that I could kind of critically reflect the power issues, like what's going on with Luke, to find a more constructive way to reposition myself and also to kind of renegotiate the way he interacted in the following recorded sessions.
Yeah, so I mean, unconscious privilege right there. So however well you think you kind of mitigated against it, yeah, I think be on guard constantly. Okay, and the other challenge was getting published. Again, we're going to talk about duoethnography in detail in the workshop, but it's a new methodology. It's becoming fairly widespread in social sciences, but it's still pretty new to the language teaching field, which meant a lot of journals weren't keen on it. And I think the main thing, and again, we'll go into detail about this in the workshop, is the reconstructed dialogues. So part of the data are basically the transcripts from the discussions, but in the writing up of the data, they are slightly reconstructed in order to make it kind of easier to understand and more accessible and all kinds of things. And that did not sit well with the reviewers, basically. It took a lot of persuasion, and one reviewer went by the wayside, but the editor kind of got behind us in the end. But yeah, it was a challenge. Yeah. Okay, which I guess brings us on for the final message of this part of the webinar. Just the idea of thinking about professional development or any kind of critical language identity research. I think placing teacher identity at the center of it is a really kind of rich theme of things that can be explored.
Right. And another thing that we'd like to emphasize is that it can be critical to utilize intersectionality as an analytical lens when it comes to analyzing how the power imbalances are manifested in many different ways in relation to the interconnected and also mutually influencing social categories that we are situated in.
Okay, I think that's it for this part of the presentation. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to go straight into the workshop? Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah.
Unless you want to answer the question that is on the chat box at the moment.
Oh, I can't see. Okay, I can't see the chat box with my screen share.
Would you like me to read it for you?
Is that okay? Yes, please.
All right, so the question says, the question is by Amir. Would you say teacher burnout could be part of identity at some point?
Teacher burnout.
Correct. Teacher burnout could be a part of identity at some point.
Yusko, do you want to answer this? You've done quite a bit on kind of teacher emotions and things like that.
I think teacher burnout could be a significant contributor to affect our sense of self as a language teacher, but also, and I'm not really sure if I would call it part of the identity, but like some of the factors that can influence our sense of self as a language teacher, for sure. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. And going back to kind of Burkheisen's definition, a kind of composite definition of teacher identity, he puts kind of emotional at the core of that. And I think that relates to that part of the identity. Yeah, I do. And I think it's part of professional development. And I think if that is something that teachers are experiencing and they're looking to kind of delve very kind of deep into, I think duoethnography, which we're about to talk about, and it's almost like the perfect segue, is perhaps a very, very good tool in order to investigate that.
Yeah, that would be a great topic to explore.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Should we move on to the workshop now?
Awesome. Okay, so let's do it. Okay, welcome to the second part. So we're going to do a workshop. Hopefully there'll be time for people to share their ideas and maybe start planning a project if possible. And we're going to talk quite generally about duoethnography and what it is, how to do it, and maybe today try to get you thinking about what kind of I still have trouble saying the word duoethnography you might be interested in doing in the future. So hopefully there'll be enough time for people to chat to each other and share ideas and things like that.
So this is the outline of our workshop. So we're going to start with the definition, or how we would frame the duoethnography as a methodology. And the first stage is to show you how to decide on a topic and data collection method. If you're interested in using methodology if you're interested in duoethnography as a research methodology. The second stage is how you can collect data. And the last stage is how we can analyze our data and decide on what we want to do in order to present our findings in a written form.
Yeah, and if you are interested, the book you can see on the right there, this is by myself and Robert Lowe as editors, but Yusuko's got a chapter in there as well. This is pretty much the first, I think, the first book on using duoethnography in English language teaching. It is kind of Japan focused, but not necessarily. But it's got kind of everything in there, really. Okay, so let's get on to what is duoethnography. So duoethnography is an emerging methodology in social science, as described as in which two or more researchers of difference juxtapose their life histories to provide multiple understandings of the world. That's a definition given by Norris and Sawyer. They are the pioneers of duoethnography, starting back in around 2006, 2007, was their first paper. So yeah, it's a very, very new methodology.
This methodology originally roots in autoethnography and also narrative inquiry. And I guess the difference is that the researchers in duoethnography is the researched, and there are usually at least 2 participants in the research project. And it draws on post-structuralism in a way that it embraces the notions of identity that we explained earlier, ongoing, multiple, and dynamic aspects of our identities, instead of them being binary and essentialized. And it also pays particular attention to the power relations in context. So it is useful when researchers compare 2 or more individual life stories that are not just different, but also not equal at the same time. And I think we showed some of the examples earlier in the presentation. And in relation to this, duoethnography takes a critical stance in order to promote social justice and equity, aiming to deconstruct culturally dominant discourses, and mainly things that we like. This includes things such as challenging invisible biases or elusive notion of like fairness and equality, and also things like assumed privileges that certain groups of people are entitled to.
Yeah, and at the core of duoethnography is this kind of collaborative dialogic approach. So the main idea is using dialogue in order to explore whatever topic you're interested in exploring. And you do that by, as it says, by kind of juxtaposing your experiences and your life histories. We're going to talk about it a bit later earlier on, but I'm very keen to emphasize it. A lot of people kind of see duoethnography as just kind of talking about yourself. That's not the point. So the main thing is to keep the again, I'm going to say it later, but I want to reinforce, keep the topic, and the people, although the researchers are also the participants at the same time, and you are investigating your life experiences and your histories, you are still merely the site of the research. Yeah, so it's a good idea to see yourself as the research site, but not the topic of the research. And it's very important to keep that very, very clear. I'm going to say it again later. So the topic is whatever you're exploring: sexuality, the intersection of race and gender, whatever. And yourself is the topic. Sorry, it's the site of this, but you're definitely not the topic. The data is analyzed and coded by emergent themes, as you would do with any qualitative data. As I said, it's got the ethnography part in the name, duoethnography. So it uses ethnographic methods, lots of kind of grounded theory approaches coming in. So starting from a general standpoint and seeing whatever data comes up and coding by theme, as you would with anyone that's familiar with kind of qualitative research. And then the transcripts are reconstructed as linear and coherent dialogues. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about it later, but the idea that we had trouble getting published was this. So the transcripts of the dialogues for the final presentation are reconstructed. And the reason for this is, well, there's lots of reasons for it. And personally, I think it's one of the really good points about duoethnography. So we tend to get very kind of stilted conversation for a start. If you have like a pure transcript, there's lots of ums and ers and etc. And for some research, that's vital, and we understand that. But it also kind of excludes a lot of people because people that are not familiar with transcription conventions and things like that are often kind of turned off or immediately just kind of glaze over once they see like a page of transcription. So it kind of makes it more accessible, especially for researchers that are starting out, especially for practicing teachers that are maybe don't have any intention of being academics as such, but they can still use duoethnography to help them in their own professional development. It's great for kind of new teachers and things like that. And also sometimes the data is disjointed. We're going to talk about data collection later, but if it's connected in a disjointed way, we can kind of reconstruct it to put it together as a linear kind of dialogue and make it kind of really nice and neat and clear. But again, we'll talk about it a bit later. Okay. So stage one is deciding on topic and data collection methods. I guess the first thing to do is to decide on the purpose. What kind of research do you want to do? So there are many more, I'm sure. The three areas that are covered in the Multilingual Matters book are reflective practice. They're using it as a form of reflective practice. That's how our project started. Critical research, which is how our project ended up, that we just talked about. And finally, teacher training and professional development. So using it to get new trainees or maybe established teachers to kind of reflect on themselves and their careers. So first of all, decide what do you want to use duoethnography for?
So the second one is to decide on means of data collection. And there are many ways to do this, but probably the most common way to do this is to do it face-to-face in a spoken form. And I would say this would be the best way to engage the most deeply with your collaborators, and also probably easier to kind of get connected and get to know the kind of authentic self the most. And this is how we collected the data for this paper as well. The second one is using the video chat, and it's also in a spoken form. This can be pretty useful nowadays, especially during the pandemic, but also this can be done with someone that you cannot really see easily, like someone living far away. And the last one is the instant messaging and also email. So this will be done in a written form. I've never done this personally, but Luke, you've done this before, right?
Yeah. It was, well, I say, well, the good point about doing it by instant messaging is you skip the transcription stage. And for anyone that's ever done any transcribing, this is a big bonus. It's just there. You just copy and paste it, and then you tidy it up when you reconstruct it. That's a big bonus. On the downside, it was definitely. I found, even though I was doing it with someone that I know well, I found myself becoming more formal for some reason. I don't know why. It just, I guess I'm used to writing academically. So when I write, I'm slightly more formal. So I felt that our kind of communication was, I don't know. I don't think it went as kind of deep and intimate as it did when I was talking to Yuzuko. And I think maybe the instant messaging kind of was part of that. But skipping the transcription stage is a big bonus if you're especially if you're pressed for time and things like that. So decide how you're going to do it, and finally decide on the topic. There's not much to say here. It depends on your purpose, basically. So if you're interested in reflective practice, maybe it's something very specific. It's something in your teaching that you want to improve on, or something like that. You want to talk to someone else, see how they're going about it. If you're doing critical research, whatever you are into in terms of research, then that's fine. And again, I just want to say again, remember all the time that you are not the topic, you are merely the site of the research that you're doing. So think about your purpose, and then the topic will be related to that. Okay, I think it's time for you to stop listening to us and talk to each other. So we're going to put you into breakout rooms for 5 minutes or so, if that's okay. And we'd like you just to have a quick chat. Just say hello first, say your name, and just have a quick chat to the people in the group, and think about what would you like to use duoethnography for? So reflective practice, critical research, teacher development, or something else that we haven't thought of. What means of data collection do you think would be best for you? And what kind of topics are you interested in exploring? Is it something more personal in terms of reflective practice? Or is it something from your research field that you think duoethnography might be useful for? We're going to put the same questions into the chat box so that you can still see them when you're in your chat rooms. I think we're nearly done, and we're going to run out of time for question and answer at this rate. So we'll go through the last part quickly.
Okay. So the last one, stage 3, is analysis and presentation. And the first point for analysis is to identify key themes by going over the data like over and over again, and look for what was salient, what was most significant in our dialogues, and these themes usually emerge out of the data. And in terms of the analytical framework, like intersectionality that we talked about earlier, it can be useful for analyze your data, but it's actually not necessary for duoethnography if you don't want to. And also, it also depends on what you would like to do with your work, your final product, and that is related to the presentation.
Yeah, so there's kind of two kinds of duoethnography. There's traditional style, which our paper kind of represents. So you've got your literature review, you introduce the research questions, you present the data and discussion, and you have a conclusion. But also there's a lot of duoethnographies around that take kind of a non-traditional view, where there's none of that, basically. The literature review is often included in the dialogue, so the citations will be inside the dialogue. And usually because the researchers are from a similar field, we know what each other's talking about. Personally, I really like that kind of approach, using the artifacts as well. So photos and pictures are often also included in the final presentation of some duoethnographies. And it's also common to just have no conclusion at all. I think one of the philosophy of duoethnography is that the reader, as Yuzuko was saying earlier, is kind of the third participant. So the reader takes from it what they take from it. It's not up to you to force your views on what this shows onto the reader. That's up to them to take from it what they want to take from it. And again, I'm very sympathetic with this approach. And if you've read any duoethnographies that do take this approach, they're very engaging and they're very easy to read. And I think they're very revealing about the topics that they're investigating. However, if you do want to get published in peer-reviewed journals, it may be a good idea to take the traditional routes. But yeah, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. So let's have our final breakout room session. First of all, do you need an analytical framework for your study? So if you are thinking about one particular study at the moment, do you think you need one? If so, what framework would work well? And what kind of presentation style are you interested in? Traditional style or non-traditional style? So maybe just a last 5 minutes on this, and then we'll have some question and answer. Okay, should we finish off very quickly? Sorry, we're very running out of time. Okay, we'll just finish off with some tips and advice, basically. So the first thing is find a good collaborator. It's everything, basically. You need to be someone that you can trust and that you feel comfortable with. Duoethnographies often end up getting way deeper and more intimate than you could possibly anticipate. So make sure it's someone that you trust and you're comfortable with.
And the second point is find a topic that is meaningful for you and your collaborator. And as Luke said a few times earlier, the topic can depend on the possible purposes that you'd be interested in exploring it, but make sure that you are the side of the research and not the topic of the research as well.
And as Yuzuko elaborated on earlier, be very aware of the power imbalances between collaborators. You may think, okay, hey, we're equal, we're both researchers. Unfortunately, the world doesn't work like that. There's always hierarchies. There's always power imbalances, whether we like it or not. So yeah, take actions to mitigate against it. Actively talk to each other about it at every step of the way, basically.
Right. And lastly, duoethnography may not fit into the traditional research paradigms, but we believe it can offer significant insights into our teacher identity and also teaching practice as well, that the conventional research paradigms may not be able to. So we suggest don't be afraid to break the rules in your research.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you both so much for this amazing presentation and workshop. I don't know if it's like, I don't know how to do these virtual like rounds of applause.
There is an icon at the
oh
bottom
yeah, like this one. I'm also going to paste a link to your article and the book that you referred to earlier in the chat box for anybody who wants to directly link there. But we do have a few minutes left for some Q&A. So if anybody has some questions that they would like to ask, feel free to.
I have one. You said that this is a new topic, right? Or a new methodology, or I don't know if it's a new methodology, but like something that is started to being used in language education. How difficult it is for the reviewers to accept this type of methodology from your experience?
Very. Our first manuscript, the first draft, I mean the manuscript that we submitted for the first time looked nothing like the final. I mean, I guess that's kind of like common, but I mean, we had to negotiate quite a lot. But what do you think?
Yeah. But again, I think there's, I mean, we went through at least one review or two. But I think it depends. They're slowly kind of trickling out now out of academia. So yeah, I mean, we had that in the Journal of Language, Identity and Education, which is a high-profile journal. If those kind of journals accepted, I think other ones follow suit. We had another one published in Applied Linguistics Review, which again is a pretty, it's a pretty mainstream, I guess, accepted journal. So if these kind of places are starting to publish it, which they are, I don't see any reason why other people won't follow suit. So it's happening, but slowly. Yeah.
I think it's important for reviewers to, I mean, I think we need to kind of, how do you say? We need to definitely persuade the reviewers that the way we collected data and analyzed it and presented it is based. It's not just random conversations and we just copied and pasted it and called it, finished. But as long as they can accept that, I think, I mean, they can, as long as they understand the tenets of duoethnography, I think, I think we were able to kind of convince them that it should be an acceptable methodology as well.
Yeah, and I think if the topic and the contents are strong enough, I think that often overrides any concerns about the methodology as well. Yeah.
Thank you. There is a question on the chat box also. I don't know if you have access to it.
It says, how do you overcome power imbalances between collaborators?
Well, I think it's not just with Luke. I think, I mean, like power imbalances are pretty much anywhere. And we cannot really, I don't know if I don't know if it's possible to completely eliminate it. I think the power structure is always there. But I want to believe that there's always a ways to kind of mitigate the imbalances between us. Personally, I think the biggest key factor was to recognize it, because like at the beginning it can be pretty subtle and like you just feel something, and sometimes you don't really know what it is, and then you realize, oh, okay, that's what's happening. And that really helped by writing for me. I think there are different ways for different people, and but the most helpful part was the dialogue with the person. Like you need to kind of like put it out there to let them know, because oftentimes the other person may not be aware of that. And also I think it's important not to take it personally, because like, I mean, like we talked about it a lot, but it's not about who he is, like it's not really about his personality or anything. It's just that the part structures that we're situated in. So I think it's honest, open conversations with them to let them know, and both of us like be aware of that issue and continue the dialogue. I'm not really sure this is the ultimate answer, but that definitely helped for me.
Also, I would say look for it in the data. I was reviewing a duoethnography recently for a journal, which is what happens when you become the duoethnography guy. Like from the dialogue that they presented, instantly I could see the power imbalances just in the way that one person was speaking. And I pointed it out in my review, and they were totally shocked. Well, I can see it instantly. So yeah, just look out for it. It's there. It's there. Yeah.
Great. I would say, and with that, I think we've come right up to the end of our 90 minutes together. But I just want to thank both Luke and Yuzuko again so much. I'm just so thrilled that you were willing to present and to share your work with us.